Hello, listeners. My name is Lowell, he, him, and welcome to the Open Hearth podcast. I'm the community manager for the Open Hearth Gaming Community. Our podcast offers a survey of role-playing games, drawing on the experience of players, game facilitators, and Discord lurkers. Each episode, we ask two members to talk about a game they played, read, or otherwise experienced in the last few months with the community, elsewhere online, or even face-to-face. So today we have with us Jex Thomas
Hello.
and Mike Minutillo.
G'day.
So very glad to have you both here. I appreciate this. We've got wildly differing time zones, and I like that we were able to coordinate this. So for this first segment, we're going to go around, have everyone tell us how their recent gaming has gone, what they've played or have coming up, and then talk with us about a particular game. And we're going to start with Jex. Jex, how has your recent gaming been?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been pretty busy. I have an ongoing campaign of my game, Bump in the Dark, with the same people I've been playing with for 3 going on 4 years
Mm.
now. That's probably wrapping up soon. I'm also playing in a bi-weekly campaign of The Last Caravan, which has been
Ooh.
fun. I'm currently in a weekly series of Urban Shadows 2E with some folks through Open Hearth. And then recently, reading but not playing yet, The Haunting of Cliff Cove by our Rook Studio.
And what game is it you want to talk with us about?
Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about the Girls of the Genziana Hotel. Girls of Genziana Hotel is a role-playing game by Hendrik ten Napel about chambermaids investigating the disappearance of kind of one of their own. It is the 19th century. All the girls work at the Genziana Hotel, which is an alpine hotel kind of at the edge of the German territories. The Napoleonic Wars have come to an end. Germany is changing. That's not so important to the player characters. What they really know is what they need to know is what happened to this missing chambermaid. So it's a mystery game, but it's also kind of a game about empowerment and female rebellion and subverting oppressive power dynamics. So it's pretty cool. It is a Powered by the Apocalypse game and kind of carved from Brindlewood, with that sort of mystery system from Brindlewood Bay and The Between and those games. It's currently available in an Ashcan form, which you can get on itch.io. The first thing about it that I want to call out is just that it's really, the graphic design is really good. It's this beautiful, very clean layout that I really appreciate. I love the way the Ashcan is structured. I love that it has the table of contents, and then the page immediately after is called the front desk. And it's like, if you've played this game before, go to this page. If you're new to role-playing games, go to this page. If you've played a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse, maybe check this out because it's a little bit different, that kind of thing, which I really like. I think that's helpful. It's kind of the gothic horror genre, which is a genre I was really liking, but also kind of not as familiar with as I probably should be for how much I enjoy works within it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think there's kind of 2 things that I really, really appreciate about this game a lot. First is that it has a very, like, clear sense of time and place. And that's something I really, really appreciate in games. I mean, not every game has to have that. I love a game where you can, bring in your own setting and make it up as you go, but I really appreciate games that are very specific. And, this is a game that's very specific. In my own kinda game design work, that's something I really like to do. And I think that this game is just situated in such a specific point in history, and it's just really interesting to kind of see how that plays out in the game itself. And that kind of ties into the other part of this game that I really appreciate, and again, appreciate sort of generally in games, is when mechanics are used to really, like, reinforce the themes of the game. So one way we see that in the Girls of the Genziana Hotel is just in the basic moves. So this is back to kind of standard PBTA having a number of basic moves, unlike Brindlewood Bay, where you really just have the couple. And the way the basic moves are named, I think, really reinforce the theme. One of them, for example, is take what you can get. Another one is step out of line. And then there's a move about kind of remembering Marja, who's the character who's missing, and the girls come together and have this sort of communal memory of the one who's missing, and so it just does a really good job of kind of underlining a lot of those themes. The other thing that I absolutely love, and this might be partially because I'm a mental health therapist in my day job, but it has grief moves. So these are moves that are on a card. You receive it at the start of play. So this is kind of like inspired by the Warren, I think.
Mhm.
But it's these elements of grief: shock, denial, guilt, anger, bargaining, depression, but also hope. And you get the card at the start of play. When your stress track fills for the first time, you flip it over. And it shows you kind of what happens when your character becomes stressed out and overwhelmed with grief, but it also augments the other moves or some of the other moves. Like usually one card kind of affects one other move for the rest of the game. So it's almost like kind of advancing a move in some other Powered by the Apocalypse games.
So there's a different set of cards that get distributed.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, that's really
Yeah,
interesting.
so so each one of those kind of, shock, denial, guilt, anger, those are all different cards. So like guilt, for instance,
Okay.
it tells you when grief takes over, take the blame for someone else's mistake, blame them for yours, or find fault in anything. So it's kind of what happens when you stress out for the first time. But then it also augments kind of this other part. So, like when you take a condition, clear your stress. If it's plausible, you can take on a condition instead of another girl. So
Hmm.
it gives you kind of this, unlocks these powers, and powers is maybe not quite the right word,
All right.
but mechanics that otherwise wouldn't exist. So I think that's just like it's really cool. You get it at the beginning of the game, and depending on kind of how well you're managing your stress, it will take a while to kind of unlock that. Or if you're like me and you really follow the player character by like, like you're driving a stolen car thing,
Hmm.
you might get that right away. I think there's six. I think your stress track is six. So, I mean, that potentially can fill pretty quick.
Can I ask, do you know at the start of the game what that grief move is, or do you find that out along with all the other players at the table?
Yes, you flip it over when your stress track fills for the first time. So you
Um,
don't know. As far as I know, let me make sure these cards aren't double sided. I guess the cards are double-sided, so I guess
okay.
you know which one you have,
Mm.
but you don't know the effect of it
Okay.
until you flip it over. So, like, the back of the card for the one we just read, Guilt, is just says, "When you stress out for the first time, flip this card. Grief takes over. You automatically miss on any move you trigger without the support of another girl." All of them have basically that same sentence on them, so that's what
Mhm.
you see on the back of the card. I do kinda like that idea, though, that you don't know how your grief manifests or, like, what kind of grief you
Wow.
have
Yeah.
until later in play. So, I mean, I don't know, you could probably play it like that pretty easily. And then kind of the final thing that the game does that I think is, I mean, it does a lot of things that I think are really cool, but the final thing I wanna talk about is how it uses phases of play to kind of reinforce the themes of the game. And so, this is kind of like Brindlewood Bay or The Between, where there's kind of like, night and day, where, day is safer, night is more dangerous. But this really pushes into that idea a lot more. It technically has four phases: dawn, day, twilight, and night. And I would actually say that this is less inspired by the day and night moves in Card from Brindlewood games, and it's far more influenced by night witches.
Mhm.
And, there's really kind of a big difference between day and night, particularly because in this game, you still have to do your job. You're still a chambermaid at this hotel and have to like attend to those things. Well, then at night, kind of going and investigating this mystery and finding ways to subvert the oppressive patriarchy that kind of runs the hotel. And I just think it's so cool. It has a lot of procedural elements. So, for instance, at dawn, you kind of always run through a certain set of steps, clear to stress if you've had a full night's sleep, frame a scene in which the kind of manager of the chambermaids gathers them all together. And then it goes through like she makes announcements, she assigns everyone a task, assigns everyone a secondary task, doles out punishments. And then the day cycle is much more kind of open, but you're doing your work. It has, I think, really good tips about kind of how to make scenes. And then Twilight again is like pretty procedural. It's almost the opposite of the Dawn one. And then at night, that's when, yeah, you can do more of this sort of mystery solving, investigating. But there's also like rules for like if you go to sleep, there's like these like dream prompts that are like
Mm.
super cool and spooky and like feel like kind of like almost like Lynchian to me. And so it's just, yeah, it's really cool. I really like the way it kind of distills the cycle of play. It feels like a game that has a lot of support for people who've maybe never played a game like this before. I think that's also really great for a game that tackles difficult subjects, right? Like this is very much a game that's like looking at like misogynistic violence, right? Patriarchal violence. Maybe not the same way as like Bluebeard's Bride does, but I think on that same sort of spectrum. And so I think giving those tools to really kind of help people through it, I just think is really awesome. And there is actually a little section in the book too that just talks about like what it means to, situate a game in like a real period of history. So yeah, I think Hendrik just really put together an awesome little game. I'm really excited to see what more becomes of it as it continues being play tested and it moves towards being like a full book rather than this sort of 50-page ash can.
Is it intended for like a short series, or is it built as a one shot? What's that expectation?
I think that it can be played as a one shot or a short series. It doesn't to me feel like something that would work very well for like a long campaign,
Mhm.
which I think tends to be true with a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. So this is a game I've read and am very
Right.
excited about and have not actually gotten to play yet. But I know when Hendrik was play testing it, I believe there is a combination of some one shots and then also a couple kind of 2-3 session runs.
Mhm. That period pick is really wild.
Mm.
Like that end of the Napoleonic Wars, especially in Germany, it's almost an apocalyptic landscape at that point
Uh-huh.
in Europe. So that's really interesting to me that they would choose that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I'm not that's not an era of history that I am, super familiar with either, and, this kind of makes me want to know more. I mean, I remember when I played, like, the video game Pentiment, all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, I need to know more about the Holy Roman Empire and, what's going on in Alpine villages," and this kinda has a similar thing for me.
That's wild. Mike, do you have any questions?
I guess the only question is, when is this showing up on the calendar? It sounds great.
Right. I don't know if it's been on the calendar yet or not.
Yeah.
I definitely would, once I have a little more time, would love to try running it or
Yeah.
playing it.
Yeah. Do you know if does he have a character keeper, like a Google keeper out there, or
I
is that
do
some?
not believe that there's a character keeper
Okay. Well,
yet.
that's a
Um,
task for someone in the community then
yeah,
is doing that. That's great.
yeah.
I was looking at the character sheet, and I think it's half an A4 page, and the other half
Okay.
is dedicated to the basic moves, so it should be
Mhm.
relatively simple to set up,
Yeah,
I imagine.
pretty simple one, yeah.
Yeah, I love the cards. One of my favorite bits of Zombie World
Mhm.
is that one of those cards is, I believe one of them is face down and gets revealed, and that opening up of that kind of provides a swerve there. So
Mhm.
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Very underrated game, Zombie World, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to come to Mike next. Mike, tell us about your recent gaming.
Yeah, okay. So I played in a bunch of one shots so far this year. It's funny that Jax mentioned gothic horror because I think a few of mine fall into that category. So I played Warning to the Curious, which is a game based on the works of M.R. James, which are a bunch of ghost stories set in England. We were a collection of obsessive scholars investigating some mysterious event. I had an absolute blast with this game. This was a game that made me realize that there's quite a few games out there that have a move related to spouting technobabble. A lot of science fiction games tend to have this, and this game made me realize there's probably an opening in the industry somewhere to do that for other genres. So
Hmm.
I was playing an archaeologist, and I would have loved to have had some kind of move that had here are some archaeology terms that you can just scatter in to what you're doing and what you're saying. But yeah, we were playing doomed scholars that got into a very sticky situation. I also played it in a one shot of Lovecraftesque as part of Thomas's Indie RPG Variety Hour. I don't want to talk too much about that game here because that's spoiler alert. That is the game that I want to talk about
Okay.
further in the next segment. Off Hearth, I played a game called Super Bandit, which is a 24xx game.
Oh, okay.
That is, I played this as part of the Indie Game Reading Club IGR Con. I played with the designer Adam Schwaniger. I think that's how you pronounce that name. This is like a space dogfighting sort of game.
Oh.
So imagine being Viper pilots in Battlestar Galactica. That was very similar to the game that we played. I have been looking for a long time for a aerial dogfighting game that isn't overly complicated. This
Mm.
one is great. This
that's
one
great.
this one
Cool.
fits on. I think it fits on 3 or 4 pages. 4 if you include the awesome single piece of artwork that's in the game. It has a very simple rock paper scissors style mechanic in
Ooh.
terms of dogfighting, where you just match up 2 fighters and both of you have to pick moves at the same time and then reveal. So this was another game. The designer actually printed out cards, so he had the cards in his hand, and he would pick a move, and you would pick a move, and you would both reveal at the same time, and
I
that
love
tells you
that.
kind of what you're rolling. And we had an absolute blast with this game. We immediately fell into different roles on the team, and yeah, flying around and trying to outperform one another. It felt very Top Gun. It felt like a space dogfighting game.
Mhm.
That was really a lot of fun. I played in a game called Cryptid TV, which was run by Mint here on the Open Hearth. This is a hack of honey heist
Mm.
from Grant Howitt, where a reality TV show comes to a small town trying to gather evidence of cryptids, and you are the cryptids that are trying to foil the efforts of the reality TV show, but also somewhat getting involved. And I played a very excitable chupacabra in that game that was super excited to be on TV. There was only 2 players and a GM, which worked out really well. I really, really had a blast playing that game. And then the most recent game that I've just started was a game of Pasión de las Pasiones. We are playing a specific playset, Pasión de la Noche, I think,
Mhm.
Passion of the Night. So far, we've only done character creation for that, and so we still waiting for the very first session to come through. But in the podcast at the end of the year, I mentioned that Pasión de las Pasiones was my favorite game of last year that I had an absolute blast with, and even now, just with character creation, I've had a really good time playing this. Always a blast. I
Yeah.
thoroughly recommend people pick that game up.
Such a good game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
a couple
it's
years in a row
surprising.
was my pick for favorite game of the year, at
Mm.
least twice in a row. So yeah.
So, the game that I want to talk about, though, is Lovecraftesque. And I've seen in Discord people have started to get physical copies of the game, obviously shipping now from, I suspect, a Kickstarter, although I was not as involved in Kickstarter at the time. But yeah, that game is now shipping. And there you go. Jex is holding up a copy.
Jack's holding a beautiful copy.
So, the pitch from the website is that Lovecraftesque is a GM-less tabletop game that creates a compelling cosmic horror tale in a single session of play. You tell the story of a lone witness at the mercy of strange and terrifying events. The game helps you create a slow building mystery culminating in a climactic scene of horror. This game is designed by Becky Anderson and Josh Fox and published by Black Armada Games. So it is a box game. We talked before about games with cards and things that you can kind of hold on to. This game has that, and it also has a board that you play on, like a centralized board to kind of keep track of the state of the game and where you're at. We played the Roll20 version, which I think there is an official module available as well. There are so many things that I really enjoyed about this game. The first one that I want to pick up on is the rotating roles. So in the game, there are sort of 3 roles that you can fulfill at any given point in time. The game is described as GM-less, but in any given scene, there is a narrator, a witness, and whispers. The narrator kind of sets the scene, tells you where you're at, and gives you details about what's going on in the scene. And the person playing the witness, there's only one witness throughout the entire game. So you're telling the story of a single person's descent into cosmic horror. But the who is currently playing the witness shifts as the game goes on. So you play out a scene with one person being the narrator, one person being the witness, and the rest of the players playing as whispers. And then everything rotates around. So somebody else will be the narrator, somebody else will play the witness, and then a different set of people will play the whispers. And the role of the whispers to provide details to the narrator. So the narrator can ask a question and kind of say like, well, what does this room smell like, or what is some visual detail that tells you that something awful happened here? And the whispers kind of give some detail to add to the role. And I think this is an absolutely fantastic way to get people into game mastering and running a table, because the specifics of what you're expected to do in any given moment are very hyper focused and hyper defined. And you don't feel like, oh, well, the entire story's up to me. I know when you first get into GMing, and especially GMing PBTA games, there's kind of a blank slate problem of the story could go anywhere and you don't know anything yet. And a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games, they encourage you not to have too much planned in advance. And this game really leans into that and kind of forces you to think in the moment. Of kind of, you have a discussion as a group and say, okay, this is where the first scene is going to be, and go. and the person playing the witness kind of then takes over a little bit and tells you what they do in character. And everything continues until the narrator reveals a clue, which at the start of the game, everybody's given a hand of cards which have clues on them. And the narrator will connect one of the clues in their hands to something that's happening in the scene. And that is a clue to the greater mystery that's going on. After that happens, the person playing the witness, the scene kind of ends, and the person playing the witness does a move called rationalization, where they will kind of they have to examine the thing that just happened, and they have to explain it away in more mundane terms. They kind of have to come up with a reason why nothing supernatural is happening. And in actual fact, this is one of the rules of the game, is that the witness cannot admit to the existence of the supernatural.
Hmm.
So at the end of every scene, they will kind of examine what happened. And in the case of the game that we played, we did it as like a diary entry. So the person playing the witness would narrate a diary entry from the witness's perspective and kind of say like, well, this is what happened today. That was a bit weird, but here's what I think probably happened. The other thing that happens at the end of every scene is all of the other players, or all of the players, in fact, even the person that was playing the witness, does a move called leap to conclusions. Leap to conclusions kind of has you as a player of the game take a step back, look at the overall story, and you have to decide in your head what you think is going on. So you kind of build the mystery on your own. And a really fun thing about this is you're not allowed to tell people about the clues in your hand, and you're not allowed to talk about what your conclusions are, what you think the overall mystery is. So the game has this central mystery, but no one's in control of it. And nobody around the table really knows what's going on. They all have theories about what's going on. And there's a thing in, I think, even Lowell, maybe you can answer this because I wasn't around at the time, but even the original Powered by the Apocalypse had this idea of keeping the story feral.
Mhm.
Does that start there, or did it start with Monster Hearts? I can't remember exactly where that
I
starts.
think that's feral does fit with original Apocalypse World, so I do think that feeling is there, that vibe.
Yeah. So Lovecraftesque manages to pull this off mechanically because nobody at the table is really in charge of the story, and you're not allowed to collaborate on it. So you kind of you are collaborating without colluding, as it were. Like everybody around the table has an idea of what's going on. Nobody controls that, and because the narrator role kind of moves around, and because the people that aren't the narrator or the witness are providing details, typically you'll provide details that kind of reinforce the theme of what you think is going on, which makes the story feel strange and odd. And it really is magic at the table. Think this is something that I haven't seen another game do successfully
Hmm.
so far in my playing. The other thing that happens is because the game has this very tactile experience where you've got a collection of cards and things, a lot of the rules are actually written on the cards. So there is a rule at the very start of the game that says no serious harm can come to the witness. I think one of the other rules is the one I mentioned earlier, saying that the witness can't admit to the supernatural. And one of the cool things about having these sorts of rules written on cards is you can take them away. So at a certain point in the game, the rules of the story literally change. You go
Oh,
from the
wow.
witness is safe to suddenly there is a point in the game where the game instructs you take that card away, and now the witness is no longer safe. And that's a, a somewhat terrifying moment mechanically that then feeds into the way that you're thinking about the story as you go. And I think that's really clever. Then one of the final things I want to talk about is the journey into darkness. So the game is roughly broken down into three phases. It's sort of a three-act story. At the start of the story, every scene brings in a new clue. So because everybody starts the game with a handful of clues, at the start of the game, everybody puts a clue down on the table at the end of their scene where they're the narrator. In the second part of the game, you connect back to an existing clue. So rather than playing a new clue, you kind of connect things back and you tighten everything up. In the third act, everything goes to heck. It's literally becomes chaotic. And in the game that we played it as the first two acts, everybody sort of plays out a scene. In the third act, it was almost like everybody gives two or three sentences of the scene, and then we move to the next sort of player who narrates the next two or three sentences of the scene. And so it became very rapid. And you can see this in my notes. So I try and keep fairly consistent notes while we're playing. It's really helpful, especially for games that go over more than one session, to be able to go back and say, okay, well, this is kind of what happened. My notes stop at the start of the descent into.
I feel like that
at the start of
itself feels Lovecraftian.
Yes.
I have very strong memories about exactly what happened in that scene. I didn't write any of it down
Wow.
because it was so focused, so hyper focused on the story, and even the layout of the board that you're playing on keeps track of the current scene that you're in. And the first two acts are straight lines, and when you get to the journey into darkness, it kind of trickles down the side of the board in a haphazard kind of walk. And I think if you squint, it looks like a yellow sign on the side of the board there. In short, I absolutely really love this game. We played a scenario that was put together by Thomas, who was ostensibly running the game, but it's a GM-less game.
Mhm.
So he was the organizer of the game, the facilitator, and I was really impressed that a scenario in this game is about 10 cards, and I could see just from that single playthrough that you could swap out those 10 cards with a different 10 cards and get a completely different story. I thoroughly enjoyed this and would love to pick up a physical copy, but I'm geographically challenged, so it might be a while before I'm able to do that.
And it is a big
It's
box.
a
Look how,
beast.
yeah, I don't know where I'm going to put it on my shelf. It's huge. One of the things that's really cool about the physical edition is that it actually has hidden art on the board that you have to use a black
Mm.
light
Oh,
flashlight
no,
to
that's
see,
great.
which is just amazing to me. I know that I remember that Josh and Becky had some logistical problems around that for a little while. But yeah, I'm curious. So I know there's like a lot of, I feel like it's something I see a lot of like preferences around how mysteries work in role-playing games, and sort of the Brindlewood Bay style has become very popular, but there are also people who are kind of detractors of that, who they say that doesn't feel like actually solving a mystery. I guess I'm curious, how did it feel here? Because obviously it's improvised, but sort of which impulses does this game scratch in terms of that feeling of solving a mystery?
So for the very first scene, you kind of have no idea what's going on, and it all comes down to what clue gets revealed by the narrator in that, and really the first act. Every time a new clue is revealed, that gives you that feeling. What I found is that very early on in the game, that leap to conclusion step where everybody comes up with what they think is going on, I had a very solid idea in my mind of going, okay, this is exactly what's going on. And then something really interesting happened in that as more clues were revealed and as players sort of changed the story and manipulated things, rather than changing what I thought was going on, I found ways to bend the facts to fit
Uh-huh.
the thing that I saw was happening, to kind of explain what was happening off screen, which is a thing that a lot of PBTA games kind of encourage you to do. But as a player, frequently I don't have to do that. As a GM or as a game facilitator, I do. This kind of forced everybody around the table to do that. And at the end, we did sort of reveal to each other, well, this is what we thought was going on. And people were like, oh, that makes sense. That explains why you said this, or why you added this detail to the scene. Or, yeah, so I think we were 4 players, 5 players. So rather than one mystery, there were 5 mysteries going on, and they weren't incompatible because of the way that the game works. It kind of forces you to find that what are the things that would be true no matter which one of these things is going on. And then ultimately at the end, that leaves you with a story that's fairly ambiguous, where you
Mhm.
can take multiple readings as to what was actually happening. And I think that really leans into the cosmic horror aspect of this, because
Mhm.
the best cosmic horrors don't tell you what was really happening. They leave you wondering and thinking
Right.
like, oh, I think I know what was going on.
Well, the best cosmic horror maybe even presents a solution that's not that you can't know what's going on. Our feeble human minds can't understand it. So I really like that element too, of like there is no one kind of like canon solution. You can't quite
Mhm.
figure it out. You can't quite put your finger on it. I think that's so good.
It is interesting what you both said there, that there is a thing I've seen sometimes with Brindlewood style games, that there are some people who, because they know there's going to be a solution thing at the end, they don't want to think about it too much ahead of time. And some players are thinking hard about it, but yeah, there are some players who sometimes do check out in that. So that's a really interesting thing, having that sort of pre-thinking. That's great.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I mean, that's one thing in my, my home campaign of Bump in the Dark, which uses that Brindlewood kind of style mystery system. I really encourage my players to be thinking the whole time about what might be going on. So I love that, formalizing that, just saying like from the start, you're leaping to conclusions, you're trying to figure it out. I think that's great.
Awesome. That is amazing. I'm so glad you talked about that. I'm going to go now, and I'm just going to talk. So this has been a busy week. I ran Sword Opera. I ran Star Trek Adventures. I ran Sunken Heart. I ran Apocalypse Keys, and I did the first session of Blades in the Dark, session 0, where we just built the setting because we're not using Dustful. We did build our own setting toolbox, and so that was super fun. The game I want to talk about though is Sword Opera. I ran a 2-shot of this drawn from the ash can that it has been put out. This is, as of this recording, on Kickstarter, but by the time this recording drops, the campaign may have already wrapped. It did fund. This is a game, an RPG of action and melodrama. It's by Eric Farmer and Eli Kurtz, who I know from Jianghu Hustle, that podcast a number of years ago. And they were kind enough to supply the section on sort of describing fights and combat for Hearts of Wulin. And I have a lot of respect for them. And you can see that come through. And I know that you've also worked with one of them, Jax, right?
Yeah, Eli is a contributor to Bump in the Dark. He did our maps, and I actually had the pleasure of meeting Eric this past fall at Gamehole Con in Madison. So yeah, I feel like kind of part of this little family.
So this is a Forge in the Dark game. It's part of a group of games we've seen recently, like Girl by Moonlight and Bump in the Dark and Mountain Home. And the one you mentioned earlier, Jex, the Last Caravan.
Mhm.
We've seen a lot of really interesting takes on Blades, shifting play structures, changing how the crews operate, a lot of really fun things that make Forge in the Dark, I think, maybe more accessible in some ways. So this is an action melodrama game. It's very much in my Hearts of Wulin wheelhouse. People fighting and kissing and swooning and dying in each other's arms and having tragic stories. The game itself will have a couple of these underworlds, which are the settings. And the underworld is kind of a strange heightened reality within another society there, like the world of Jianghu. But in this case, they've got a setting called San Mercutio, and it's Romeo and Juliet meets Three Musketeers meets a Tempest. So we've got some weird magic stuff. We've got courtly things. We've got sword fighting. It's a magical Renaissance Mediterranean island. So in some ways, I'm picturing sort of Shakespearean times for L.M. Raja from On the Edge. The deep cut from Atlas Games had a weird Mediterranean island with all kinds of strangeness going on in it. Your characters are paragons. They are superior people with access to new abilities. They belong to a circle. This is kind of your crew, but it's even a larger sense than the crew is. It's basically a noble family or a group or a gathering, a society. Your paragons can do cool things. They have access to the action dots that allow them to do a lot, but they also have these things called power arts, which give them a pool of some extra dice that they can throw into actions to do more sort of wuxia, leap across the room or see something, hyper detail. And there are different kinds of those power arts, like senses or movement or deflection. There are like 6 of those, and those can get spent throughout the sort of the paragon phase. And there are some ways to refresh those. In our game, most people had like 3 dice for that they could throw into the forge rolls. And they have different sources. So in our case, with the sample characters that we were kind of building on, each person had a different one. It could explain why they were able to do this based on magic, or why they were able to do this based on long-term training or just force of will. So that's a really interesting thing. One of the people had faith, and I asked them what that looked like, and they said, "Well, I actually have faith in my friends." So they were powered by friendship, which I
Cool.
love there. The game is a much looser approach to Blades in the Dark, where we have the mission and the downtime phase is standard, and even games that mix it up tend to kind of break it up that way. The Paragon phase, which is kind of our play phase, during that you have two kinds of scenes that you can call. Each character begins with at least one goal. You set a personal goal. It's a little bit like they've had a lot of talk about this in that proactive role playing stuff. There's a book for that, and I know a podcast and some YouTube videos on it. But the idea of sort of setting a goal or set of goals for your character at the start. So this kind of uses that. You have a goal. When you go into the Paragon phase, you can call a goal scene, which means that you set up a scene to maybe roll dice, but interact with people to try and further your own goal or the goal of your circle, or maybe you're just gathering information related to those goals, or maybe you're interacting with somebody kind of play-wise, relationship-wise, that'll connect to that. It gives you kind of a focus, a thing that you can call on. And those are loose RP scenes, and that's really where we're rolling dice. You can do a mission where you draw everybody together. I kind of did that for the first session just to kind of show off the mechanics. But the second session, we just kind of loosey-gooseyed, and we were running around doing different scenes and meeting people, and it was great. The other part of that Paragon phase are vignettes, and these are kind of what would otherwise be downtime actions. Everybody gets 2 of these during that Paragon phase, and you can heal your damage. You can recover all your stress. You can get a favor from someone. You can train, which means you get an XP, or if you have enough XP, you get an ability. You can send a contact to do something, and you get 2 of those. So, for example, you could roll some dice, burn some stress, clear it out, do some more gold scenes, clear your stress again. Like, people really got into it, like the flexibility of it and being able to kind of move around on that. There was still a framework and kind of a mechanical thing that had to be watched for, but it was really neat. At some point, the group will decide, okay, I think we are ready to move to the circle phase, which is kind of the capstone phase. In some ways, it feels a little bit like in Mountain Home, there's an end of the year phase. It's a little bit like that. And that starts by doing your entanglements. One of the things that you can do can pay a cost for rolls during play or Devil's Bargain and whatnot, is to add ticks to the entanglement clock for your family. And so you can build those up, and we roll on a table. And for example, we rolled theft and, kind of threw it open to the table. And one of the players said, well, I think they stole our swordmaster. He defected to the other house. And it was really good because it framed up everything that kind of came next. After you do the entanglements, you do a circle gathering, which is a big scene with all of the PCs and all of the family NPCs, and people can play the NPCs, they can play the PCs, and it's basically reflecting on all the things that happened during the Paragon phase or what happened with the entanglements. And you can do that as a family dinner. We did it as a wine tasting. You could do it as, after an evening at the theater. And then after you kind of got that set, you do a leader phase. There are sort of 3 leaders of your house. There's, I think, a boss, a general, and I want to say an executive. And the players get to kind of play out their interactions and kind of set the stage for what the next Paragon phase is going to look like, assign people to claims or what the circle wants and that. And it was really cool. Like, it felt good. We only got to that sort of circle gathering phase, and then we moved to epilogues because it was just a 2-shot. But it was great. I really liked it. It takes away some of the hard structure that old Forts in the Dark games kind of get locked into, that we've seen open up more. And I think it did a really good job. I've always wanted to have a good swashbuckling game. I don't like 7th Sea. I've tried to run that several times, and I cannot stand that system. I've played a couple of pirate-based PBTA games that were okay. I did pick up that one that's based on Starforged, and I'm kind of excited to eventually try that out. But this really scratches that itch for me. I know they're going to do a John Wick stretch goal, and I'm excited to see what other kinds of settings they're going to do for it. I really liked it. I kind of went into it predisposed to like it because I like Eric and Eli, and I thought, oh, I'll run this. It'll help support their Kickstarter campaign, which I backed. But I walked away very happy. The players enjoyed it. I had a couple of Force and Dark skeptics in there, and they had a good time. So I think this is a great game. The ash can is about, I think it's 64 pages, so it's a solid ash can, and I'm looking forward to the final version.
Yeah, it is a really cool game. I had full disclosure, my plan was actually to talk about Sword Opera tonight, and then I looked at their document and I'm like, oh, that makes sense that Lowell's already going to talk about it. I got to play in a playtest that was specifically playtest of the circle phase, and even more specifically, Eli really wanted to check out how the leaders scenes worked. And so it was this really kind of like very specific playtest, very kind of zoomed out in a lot of ways. And even doing that, where we were really kind of just like kicking the tires and sort of making sure things worked, I had so much fun.
Oh, good.
Like this game has such a drama engine, even in like those sorts of, moments that, yeah, are part of the larger whole or whatever. And yeah, I'm so excited to get to play more of it, hopefully soon.
Yeah, I really dig it. Mike, is there anything you want to ask?
Yeah, so you mentioned the players being able to call for specific different types of scenes, and that reminds me of the structure of Primetime Adventures.
Hmm.
And I was just kind of wondering, is that something where there are different mechanical benefits for running different sort of scenes? And how much does that lead to sort of players doing the thing that is best for them mechanically versus for the story and for what they want to do?
So the vignettes, are the places where we don't roll and we do the mechanics. So those are kind of aside. I think those are real short interstals between the goal scenes. Like people were very much like, I want to have a scene with this NPC, or I want
Mhm.
to go and move on this goal, or I want to have this romance. And I, at least in this play, I don't ever had the sense that anybody was leaning into what was good for them mechanically, like, oh, I want to chase down my XP triggers or anything. It felt really good because it was just basically, it was just like I was. It's a once around. We go and we check in with everybody. You get to call a scene with a PC or an NPC, and it felt really natural.
And you mentioned as well the leaders scenes, and that really reminds me of Band of Blades. I think has that
Oh
kind of mechanic as well, where
yeah,
we kind of zoom way back out and the players take on a completely different role from what they normally play. And I've always been really fascinated by that. So that
yeah.
that
I
sounds really cool.
I did. I didn't make that link until you said that. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, I think there's a level of that. That makes me want to play Bands of Blades now. Okay. All right.
I'm so on board for a game of Band of Blades.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we'll talk about that at some point. We'll figure out a time because I do enjoy playing with you. So and
Mhm.
I do want to play Band of Blades on Open Hearth because Sherry's there are two games that Sherry said no to, and Root and Band of Blades are the two that she's like, I don't think so. So
Fair enough.
yeah. All right, listeners, we are going to move on to our final segment. Listeners, for our second segment, we ask everyone to talk about something they're really digging right now and tell us why. So, Jex, please tell me, what is giving you life?
Yeah, what is giving me life right now is I have gotten way into playing Star Wars Outlaws. I don't have a lot of, I'm a parent, I work full time. I don't have a lot of time for video games, particularly video games that aren't like ones I play with my kid. But I have been staying up too late and finding time to play this game because I've just been having a blast with it. I say I tend to lean more towards like kind of shorter indie games with stories and not so much the open world thing where you can spend, 80 plus hours on it. But I really like being in the Star Wars universe. I think it really feels like Star Wars to me. I had some concerns about whether it was going to be a fun game based on just there was a lot of, some very bad faith,
Yeah.
outlash against it. But yeah, I'm having so much fun and I get to run around and I get to be a scoundrel and get to hang out in hives of scum and villainy and I get to punch stormtroopers or shoot them. What's better than that? I think right now there's a lot of pleasure in getting to punch fascist cops. So yeah, that is giving me life.
Awesome. And Mike, what is giving you life?
All right, so I want to bring to the table Oath Chronicles of Empire and Exile, which is a tabletop game from Cole Worley and with the art from Kyle Farron. This was a game from 2021. It's from the same design and art team as Root, and it has a very similar look and feel to it. It is an emergent narrative sandbox, and this is a game that I actually held off on purchasing this game for a long time because I didn't know whether or not I would get it to the table and whether or not my group would dig it. And since I purchased it, we have played nothing else because every time we get together, this is the game that we want to play. It's a game with a memory. So, to give a high level overview, you are kind of an agent of a faction in an imperial setting. One of you kind of plays the empire that is in control of everything, and at the start of the very first game, everybody else is in exile, so they are outside of the empire and doing their own sort of machinations out there. And at a certain point of the game, the person playing the Empire can offer citizenship to the other players and they can become citizens of the Empire as well. What's really interesting about the game is whoever wins becomes the Chancellor for the next session. They kind of become the Empire, and everything that they controlled stays in the game, and everything that they didn't control, so all of the other players controlled, that gets taken out of the game entirely. So this is a game with a memory. It kind of remembers what happened in the previous session, and the game evolves as you play. Not like a legacy game like Risk Legacy or Pandemic Legacy, which has a fixed sort of narrative arc that you go through and destructive sort of changes to the game where you're tearing up cards and things. But this is a game that evolves with the table that's playing it. So every time you play, it's influenced by all of the things that have gone before. And that leads to this really interesting story kind of evolving as you go on. I wanted to point out the similarity to Legacy, Life Among the Ruins.
Mm-hmm.
You ran a game that I played in of Free for the Shadow, which is a hack of Free from the Yoke, which itself is a hack of Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, which kind of has this generational play aspect. And this has a very similar feeling where it's like one generation plays out at the table, and then the next time you all get together, it's kind of the next generation. The story has moved forward a decade or two, and now we're in a new environment with a new setting, kind of seeing what's going on. One of the things that I really like about this game is even if you're terrible at it, which one of my friends is, he plays suboptimally. Let's say that. And every time I talk to him about it, he kind of reveals that he feels like the mechanics haven't clicked for him. He hasn't figured out what to do, but he still manages to influence the story, and he kind of makes his own fun at the table. Like in any given game, he sort of decides this is what I'm going to influence in this game. I'm going to mess up this person's plans, or I'm gonna go and change things over there. And I can talk about our most recent game of it, which
Mm-hmm.
was a couple of weeks ago now. There was a battle for control between two exiles, myself and one of my other friends, where in order to win the game, I needed the favor of the people, and he needed to know the darkest secret in the land. And what ended up happening is I ended up learning the darkest secret in the land, and he ended up getting the favor of the people. So we ended up in this battle going backwards and forwards, trading those things so that neither one of us could actually win the game. And from the chancellor's perspective, this is great, right? Like if the exiles are fighting one another, then the chancellor wins by default at the end of the game if nobody stops them. And at a certain point, there was an agreement sort of above the table that my chaotic friend decided he would come out of nowhere and he would disrupt my plans, which meant that the other player was able to win. He ended up winning by using a particular card in the deck. The game is run from a deck of about 200 odd cards, each of which is unique. He played a card called Book Burning, which meant he came after me and destroyed all of my secrets, which effectively locked me out of knowing what that darkest secret in the land was. And that ended up going to the other player, and he won. But what this means is that book burning is now a part of our next game. So at the start of the next game, the victory condition is continuing to hold on to that darkest secret, but also the people in power are able to go and destroy everybody else's secrets and knowledge.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that sets up a very strange dynamic for our next game, and a chancellor that is it's going to feel very dictatorial and very frightening from the perspective of the exiles in the game. And of course, at the end of the game, because he won, he offered my chaotic friend who managed to orchestrate this citizenship. So now he is a citizen going into the start of the next game and the right hand man of the chancellor. And that's like that short story is the outcome of a game that we played over a couple of hours, where a bunch of those little micro stories played out. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to get this back to the table again. It is an absolutely gorgeous game. It is so much fun to play, and it tells a story every single time.
What player count are you playing with?
We're playing with 6.
Oh, that's a good full table.
It is a good full table. It's too many, if I'm honest. Like I think on the box the playtime says 45 minutes to 150 minutes. So that gives you an idea of how long the game is supposed to take to play. Most of our games we finish sometime after midnight when we start at 7:30, 8 o'clock. So having that many players at the table, the board state tends to be fairly chaotic. It's very difficult to plan your next turn because anything might have changed in the meantime, and you have to constantly sort of have a strategic plan that fits into a constantly shifting tactical situation. Yeah, I'm having an absolute blast with it.
Awesome. So what is giving me life is kind of a weird thing in that it is giving me something to focus on to take my mind away from unwanted thought syndrome and reality. And it is, I bought a game on the Switch day one called Kamibako because it looked really cool, because it was like a JRPG and it had some puzzle elements with like tile matching stuff. And there's like a settlement building part of it. These are 3 things that I love. And the demo I played the demo before I bought it. And I was like, oh, this looks really fun. The demo is a liar. Okay. This game, I am rage playing this game. I put a couple dozen hours into it. Every decision seems to be made with the idea that we don't want the player to have like any ease or any fun. There's some great ideas and there's some great moments, but then there's some baffling decisions in there. Like, why are you doing it this way? This is how we did it 20 years ago. Just why would you do it this way? So many things. And places where the game doesn't tell you something. Throughout, they kept saying, now you can get these rewards. And I would keep seeing this pop up. And I looked all over the place. And finally, I found that you had to go back up to heaven where you started and then go into this other room and talk to this person. And then you got these rewards. It looks like a late PS2, early PS3 game. I'm really serious about this. Today, I went into a dungeon, and the dungeons have all these tiles. And as you walk on the tiles, you spend a little bit of mana. So you got to keep your mana up. And that's a little puzzle thing that you got to do. And then the fights also take mana. So you got to manage that. And then on each floor, you've got to go through, you got to do these puzzles, get through these tiles. There are at least 2 fights on each floor. So each floor takes probably around 5 minutes when all is said and done. And this dungeon is 30 floors deep, and you cannot save in the dungeon. And every floor of this freaking dungeon had 2 fights, and every fight was the same 3 zombies. Literally, I did that fight 60 some times over and over again. What I had to focus myself, because if I wasn't paying attention, I would get out of the rhythm of it. And it's wild. I'm still continuing playing. Sherry doesn't know why I keep playing it, but it's baffling, absolutely baffling to me. Oh, and every load time is like 20% longer than it ought to be. You're like sitting there going, okay, this shouldn't take that long. It's an extra 20 seconds. Oh, it's going to take me 5 button presses to get back up out of this menu. Why, thank you. I wanted to have that happen every time. It is wild, and I hate playing it, and it is keeping my attention until Monster Hunter Wilds comes out at the end of the month. So thank goodness for that.
I will say that it has 11 reviews on Steam, and they are all very positive.
They are lying. There are 2 video reviews on YouTube, and they're like, "Oh, this is an amazing game." I'm like, "You have not played this very long," it's infuriating. I don't know how people are rating it highly. That makes sense. Here's the other thing: is I'm used to, when I get to games like this these days, I'm like, okay, I don't understand the process of like having to build these things, why you would build these cities, how you'd make the items, what should I be doing stuff. I'll go look for a guide. No guides. There are no guides. There are no facts. There's you go to the thing where it says, oh, look for the tips and tricks, and you open it up and it says blank on like the game facts page. Sherry was like, you should write a guide. And I was like, no.
It's part of the experience is
It
being
is.
angered by this.
It is. It's been a long time since I hate played a game, but this is it.
What's really funny is the strength of your hatred for this game almost makes me want to check it out, right?
Oh.
Like it's like when you're like, oh, this tastes so bad, you should try it.
If it was super cheap, if it was super deep discount, but I paid full retail price for it. So
Ooh.
more fool I. All right. Listeners, we're to the end of our show, but before we go, I want to ask our guests where they can be found. Jex, where can you be found?
Yeah, you can find me on the internet, Jex J. Thomas, most places, including itch.io, where you can buy my game Bump in the Dark, or you can buy a physical copy at Indie Press Revolution. And the place where I'm probably most active is on Blue Sky. You can follow me there at lastpinepress.com.
Okay. And we'll have links to Itch and Indie Press Revolution in the show notes for everybody as well. And Mike, where can you be found?
I just want to add, you should buy Bump in the Dark because
Yes.
it's really cool.
Oh, thank you.
You can find me as Coda Mike on the Discord. I have accounts on other social media platforms that I don't really want to talk about. But I'm there basically for nostalgic and apathetic reasons that I haven't gotten rid of them. So that's the best place to find me is Coda Mike on the Discord. Come say hi.
Awesome. Listeners, that's our show. The Open Hearth podcast is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We have an online gaming calendar where folks can sign up for sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/Open Hearth Gaming. We have a Discord. We're on Blue Sky, Tumblr, and Dice Camp on Mastodon. And that's it, because that's about all I can manage for social media there. You can find out more about all of that at openhearthgaming.com. Please consider rating, subscribing, and reviewing the show. It really helps us out with whatever algorithm we are laboring under at the moment. Thank you both. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jex, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
And that is our show.